What's up guys, my name's Brandon and I've been covering iOS updates on this channel for many years now, and iOS 13 has probably been the most buggy release Apple has ever pushed out. But thankfully everything is going to change with iOS 14 in 2020, and in this video I'm going to explain how. And this whole video is based off of a recent Bloomberg report, so if you want to read that, I will leave it linked down in the description below. Now we are still a ways away from iOS 14, we probably won't see that until around June of 2020. But we do now have some very interesting news about the way Apple is going to be changing internal testing of their software in an effort to minimize the amount of overall bugs and issues. So just recently, Craig Federighi called for a kickoff meeting with Apple's software team to discuss the ways that things are going to change for iOS 14 and future iOS releases. And this all has to do with the internal testing and basically how it's being handled internally at Apple, because of course, Craig doesn't want to have another extremely buggy software release like we had with iOS 13 in the future, like with iOS 14 and iOS 15. So just like with every company, there are different teams assigned to different parts of software development. So for example, in iOS, one team may be in charge of like the mail application. They work solely on the mail application. There could be another team that works just solely on the battery life, like improving the battery life and trying to figure out why battery is draining on certain devices. And then there may be a third team that works on like UI elements, like changing the app icons for certain things, or inside of settings, the icons over here on the left, they may be in charge of just changing things like that. And according to this report, some teams will be adding features every single day that were not fully tested, while other teams would be contributing to changes weekly. And they basically just built these features and changes on top of each other without testing as they moved along. So they just kept building on top of each other. And obviously that would lead to bugs when it's two different teams or three different teams or more, just continuing to pile on new changes into the software without actually testing to see if they work fully beforehand. A good analogy for this to make a little bit more sense is like cooking a big dinner, but instead of just one person making it, there are a lot of cooks adding different ingredients without testing to see if it tastes good with those ingredients before, continuing to pile on and add more ingredients into the pot. So since that system does seem a little bit flawed, Apple is taking a new approach to building out their software. And to quote Bloomberg here, they say that the new approach calls for Apple's development teams to ensure that test versions, known as daily builds, of future software updates disable unfinished or buggy features by default. Testers will then have the option to selectively enable those features via a new internal process and settings menu dubbed flags, allowing them to isolate the impact of each individual addition on the system. So basically the developers are now going to have to disable any features or changes that are not fully working properly, and then when the internal testers at Apple go to test the software, they're going to be able to enable the features via a switch that caused the issue to try to isolate and figure out what exactly is causing the problem. In other words, now every time one of the cooks adds in an ingredient to the pot, they're going to try it out, they're going to taste it to make sure that it still tastes good before moving forward and adding in all the other ingredients. Now this of course should greatly cut down on the amount of bugs that even us beta testers should see, but definitely will reduce the amount of bugs that regular iOS users will see, like in public releases. Now of course this all seems like something that should have been done from the start, but then again it's easy to say from the outside looking in. I'm sure that a company as big and as rich as Apple has a reason for everything they do and the way they do it. So it's easy to criticize after hearing all this and from the outside looking in, but I'm sure it's nothing like what we would imagine. And to understand just how buggy iOS 13 has been, take a look at this graph here. So this shows you how many software updates were released within the first 2 months of a major iOS release. So you can see here, iOS 13 clearly is in the lead with 8 patches within the first 2 months. And I say in the lead as a bad thing. That's 4 times as many. 8 is 4 times as many as iOS 12, and the most since Craig has ever been in charge of software at Apple. So clearly some sort of change was needed, and this seems like a great solution. At least in theory, it seems like a great solution. Now granted, iOS 13 was rushed out before it was ready, and that's the whole reason that Apple developers internally called iOS 13.1 quote, what should have been iOS 13.0. So there were destined to be more releases than normal based on that botched release of iOS 13, but still, that shouldn't be happening, and hopefully in 2020 and beyond, it's not going to happen again. Now, Apple is saying that iOS 14 will focus primarily on performance and stability, but there are also expected to be a lot of new features and changes just like we saw with iOS 13. And I'm guessing that we may see a slower rollout now of the new features moving forward. Instead of just adding like all the new features and changes into the like iOS 14.0, we'll see more new changes in like 14.1, 14.2, 14.3, and so on. And we'll also likely see less iOS releases overall. And I keep saying iOS because that's the focus of this video, but Apple is saying that this will be the new process for all their software. So macOS, tvOS, watchOS, iPadOS, and so on. All of them will be far less buggy, at least in theory, than iOS 13 was this year in 2019. So yeah, with iOS 14, we're probably not going to see new releases like 2 times a month or, every week. Nothing like the craziness that was 2019 and iOS 13, which kind of sucks for me as a content creator because I did like making the videos and everything, but it did get to be a little bit much at times. It wouldn't even give me enough time to test out the software before new software got released. It was just so consistent, and it was a good thing, but also a bad thing because of how buggy iOS 13 was to, have to push out so many updates. And of course, I can already see the comment section saying, well, Apple said the same thing about iOS 13 before it was released. They said that it was going to be more stable, they were going to work on the performance and make sure there was less bugs and things like that. But the thing is, nothing internally changed with iOS 13, at least not that we know of. This time, there are major changes going on internally with the software team at Apple, so it should be much different moving forward. Now, if iOS 14 also flops like iOS 13, didn't really flop, but it just had a ton of bugs. Again, the most since Craig has been in charge, maybe the most ever as far as the point releases within the first 2 months. Then we should begin to worry. If iOS 14 flops, then we should begin to worry. But of course, I don't see that happening, especially with this coming out now. So what do you guys make of all of this? Are you excited to see a far less buggy version of iOS 14 next year? Or did you strangely enjoy the frequent iOS releases like I did? And of course, like I just said, I did like the frequent releases since I did make videos on them, but still, it would be nice to not have them come out so frequently so that I can properly test the versions on my phones. And like I said, I couldn't really keep up at certain times, but let me know what you guys think about this. Are you excited for iOS 14? Would you rather have more features and changes, but more bugs, or less bugs and also less changes? Of course, we would all like to have a lot of new features and changes and also have, very minimal bugs, but that just doesn't seem likely given iOS 13, at least not for iOS 14. Maybe for iOS 15, that'll be the case. Maybe iOS 14 is just the beginning of, stability really being improved with iOS releases and, macOS and tvOS releases. But we will see. We are less than a year away from seeing iOS 14. I'm sure we'll have a lot more news coming on iOS 14, a lot more leaks and things like that at the beginning of 2020. And of course, I will be making videos on all of that here on the channel. So make sure you are subscribed if you haven't done so already. The button is right there down below. But yeah, guys, I hope you did enjoy this video. Again, I will leave the Bloomberg article linked down in the description below. It's a very interesting and very good read. But if you enjoyed this video, basically giving you a Cliff Notes version and a easier to digest version, I would appreciate it if you gave this video a thumbs up. But anyways, guys, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you soon.